I'd like to thank my friend Patrick Piercy on the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. He is the department archivist, and he has given me permission to share this information with you. This is an international news story that happened back on February the 25th, 1990 on LaSalle Street in Indianapolis. I'll leave the address out because people still live in that house, probably a different family, I'm sure, but it is still being occupied. And so it's a very terrifying story of a poltergeist witnessed by police officers, by chaplains, by a priest, by neighbors, and by the family in broad daylight. And there is a police report covering this incident. This is a fact. And you're about to hear the police report and the story on the devil on LaSalle Street. The untold story of how police investigated poltergeist activity in Indianapolis on February 25th, 1990, by Patrick Piercy. At 8:30 p.m. Friday, 25th, 1990, Indianapolis police were given a run on a burglary in progress in the 2800 block of North LaSalle Street. What the officers found when arrived on the scene was like nothing they'd ever encountered. The officer on the left is Sergeant William Clark. The officer on the right is Patrolman Stan Anderson. This is when my department was still the Indianapolis Police Department and not the Indianapolis Metro Police Department. That's why the uniforms are different. At approximately 8:30 p.m. on February 25th, 1990, a burglary in progress run came out at 2800 North LaSalle Street. Officer Anderson, Boyd 234, an officer name omitted, received the run. I was northbound on North Sherman Drive at East Massachusetts Avenue, so I also marked out on the run since I was so close. Officer Anderson and myself arrived at that location at approximately the same time. As Officer Anderson and myself started walking towards the residence, we went through the front gate, and as we were approaching the front porch, I observed a black female run from the porch toward the yard, and an item, which was later identified as a lid off of an ice bucket, was flying out the front door toward her. Sergeant William Clark, Inter-Department Communication on the incident. The resident and complainant is identified here as Angela, not her real name. Officer Anderson walked through the front door first, and I was about 3 feet behind him. As we entered the living room, Officer Anderson, who was further in the living room, observed 3 to 4 family members sitting around a small dinette table, which was located in the west side of the living room. I was behind him facing the long portion of the living room looking toward the hallway. A vase, which was sitting on an end table over in the far corner of the living room, slid off the table, flew across the air, passed within a foot of mine and Officer Anderson's heads, and hit the wall directly behind me. There was no one in the area from where it came. Officer Anderson asked the subjects who threw the vase and why. The lady, later identified as Angela, stated no one threw it. It did it on its own, as had many other things in the house. Inspecting the house, myself and Officer Anderson talked to the resident, Angela. She told us that for the past month, unusual things were occurring. Things like glasses falling off shelves and perfume bottles falling off shelves and spilling. About 2 weeks ago, she came home from work and noticed her 27-year-old brother, alias Robert, who lives with her and who suffers from cerebral palsy, was standing in the living room in a corner with a baseball bat. He had Angela's 3-year-old son, whom he babysits during the day, behind him, as if Robert was protecting him from something in the house. Angela asked Robert what he was doing, and he stated he was protecting her son. When Angela asked what from, her son said, "A monster tried to get him." Apparently, her son was sleeping in his room and began screaming. When Robert went back to the bedroom, The south side window blew out as if something went through it. The force was so great, the glass went into the neighbor's yard. Angela's son told Robert a monster woke him up and tried to get him. Angela thought that at the time someone had vandalized the window, and that was what scared her son. She also told us of other incidents that had occurred. On Sunday, February 25th, while she was at work, her brother called her and said something was tearing the house up and items were flying through the air. She thought it was a joke, so she told her brother she was busy and to call Ghostbusters, and she hung up the phone. Angela received another call from another family member who also said something was tearing up the house. So Ms. John left work and came home. She came home to find her house ransacked. She was told by several family members that they were sitting at the kitchen table when the table started floating up in the air. The magnets on the refrigerator began shooting across the room like bullets hitting the far wall. After she was home, the stereo was thrown to the floor. The iron, which was in the kitchen, came up in the air, flew through the kitchen into the living room, hit the far wall, and left a small impression in the wall. It then raised up again, then flew across the living room, hitting the other wall. She further stated that at this time the refrigerator door flew open and the eggs in the refrigerator started popping. Then a large, approximately 50-pound potted plant, which was sitting on a shelf in the entry, floated up into the air, hovered for a moment, then crashed to the floor about 3 feet away from the shelf. After all this happened, she decided to call the police for assistance. She stated she told us, the dispatcher, it was a burglary in progress because she thought if she told them the truth, she would not have been believed. After the police were contacted and en route, she stated a roll of aluminum foil sitting on a shelf flew off the shelf toward her. She had to duck to avoid getting hit. Then the ironing board in the kitchen between the refrigerator and counter raised up in the air as if someone was holding it and moving it sideways, then rolled over onto a horizontal position. It then sailed across the kitchen, landing underneath the kitchen table. I then looked around the room again as I was about to leave. I then observed the radio that was sitting on the desk slid off, flew across the room in front of me. It hit the floor just in front of a single bed that was against the east wall, slid on the floor under the bed, then came to rest against the wall. The base was on that, flew out toward myself and Officer Anderson upon our arrival. Had a large hole in it as if it exploded from the inside. I noticed there were other pieces of glass laying around. I later learned these pieces of glass were from a hurricane-type lamp globe that fit on a candle holder, and it had exploded as if someone had lit a firecracker in it. Laying upside down on the living room floor was a video game. I noticed everything that was laying on the floor was upside down. I noticed the kitchen was also ransacked. The refrigerator door appeared to have been sprung as if twisted, but the hinges were not loose. The eggs in the refrigerator had holes in them as if they had exploded. While we were talking, I asked her if she knew of anyone in her family was now or ever had been involved in any satanic or cult-type organizations. While we were talking, we heard a strange, high-pitched, evil but scared voice that seemed to come from the center of the bedroom. The voice said, "No." We both got up and went toward the other people in the house. No one else admitted to hearing this voice. All the people in the house were accounted for, and no one was in the area of the center bedroom when myself and Angela heard the voice. Ms. John began trembling and her eyes got very big when she heard the voice. I then walked back toward the center bedroom. Up to this time, I had not entered the center bedroom. When I walked into the room, I had a strange sensation that I felt only when I was in the room. Angela's boyfriend also stated when he had been in that room, he had felt a strange sensation similar to what I had described to him that I felt. He stated the sensation he felt had upset him so much he began crying and reciting the 23rd Psalm as he walked through the house. About this time, Pastor Gibson and an elder from his church arrived on the scene. After listening to Angela, I came to the conclusion that on February 25th, 1990, based on what we were told and what we observed in my previous knowledge of these types of events, I decided to attempt to contact Chaplain Cunningham. I had our control operator contact him at home so he could contact me on the scene. While waiting for the chaplain to respond, I saw the family was visibly shaken and scared. They were all wearing crosses and had obtained holy water from one of the sisters at her parish. She had attempted to contact her priest, but he was unavailable at the time. Since she was unable to contact her priest, and I had not yet heard from the chaplain, I contacted Reverend David Gibson, my minister. I explained everything I knew, and he volunteered to come to the scene with an elder from the church. Shortly thereafter, I was able to contact the chaplain. He too said he was coming to the scene. While we were there, Tony's mother called from Puerto Rico stating she was somewhat upset over an incident that had just occurred with her. She was lying down looking into a mirror and saw an image of a man walking down the hallway of Angela's home in Indianapolis reciting the 23rd Psalm. She sensed there was something wrong, so she called Angela. After Angela and Tony's mother discussed the events that had just occurred, Tony's mother told Virginia to get Tony out of the house and back on a plane to Puerto Rico as soon as possible. When Angela was telling me about the phone conversation, I remembered seeing Angela's boyfriend walking down the hall, visibly upset and reciting the 23rd Psalm. I then took Angela to the southeast bedroom so she and I could talk privately. Patrolman Otha Stan Anderson's report on the incident. Officer Anderson. On February 25th, myself, Officer Anderson, received a radio run to 2800 North LaSalle Street on a possible burglary in progress. I responded to the run from about East 34th Street and North Sherman Drive. I also heard Sergeant Clark respond to the run, stated he was close to the house and going in also. Upon arrival, I parked about 4 or 5 houses down from that address. As I exited my vehicle, I observed an elderly lady and an elderly man also going toward that residence. They had opened the fence gate and they were in the midst of approaching the house when an object flew out of the house. The elderly lady, which I was within 5 to 6 feet from, stated, "What's going on there?" Then stopped and hesitated, then backed up. At that time, thinking the subjects might have been fighting in the house and throwing objects out, I started to go to the rear of the house, and a lady inside the house called me to come in the front door. As I walked in the front door, I observed several individuals standing directly inside the residence. An object flew over to my left. At that time, I inquired who threw that, and I was told by Ms. Angela that nobody had thrown it, that the objects were basically moving themselves, and that the only way to get the law police officers there was to tell them that her house was being broken into. If she had told the lady she was talking to on the phone that she had items moving around in the house, that no one would have shown up. At that time, we heard some kind of noise in the house, in the back bedroom. Let me repeat that. At the time, we heard some kind of noise in the back bedroom, and Sergeant Clark went to the back bedroom. He later stated, after hearing a noise back there, when he walked back there, a radio had moved from a desk to under a bed. We then went back there and we looked where he pointed out, where the radio and cord, gray and collar, had lodged up under the bed. At that time, we heard a second noise, and I turned around and walked towards the front of the house. All the subjects were in the same position, and an ashtray we observed as we walked back had fallen and moved across the floor. I then went back to Miss John, and she asked me what I was going to do about it. I asked her what she wanted me to do about it. She asked me if we had any special unit that handled these types of situations. She stated she wanted a report made and pictures taken. I was a little awed as to what I could basically do due to the fact that there were no suspects, no more than what she had said, had subjects moving around items in her house. All of the subjects had crosses around their necks. One subject was holding a bottle of water that she had signified as being holy water. The house was completely ransacked. A stereo had been turned over. Eggs in the icebox that were lined up on the top shelf had little puncture holes in the top of them. Basically, they had exploded. The room where Sergeant Clark had showed us where the radio had gone from the desk to under the bed, That window had been broken out and the glass going outward. There was one plate in the kitchen lodged between the storm window and the regular window, breaking the storm window and lodging inside. They also had a cross on the dining room table next to the phone, which I had observed when I was using the telephone. Chaplain's involvement report. Chaplain Wilbur Cunningham. Sunday evening, February 25th, 1990. While at a friend's house, my pager went off at approximately 21:20 hours. Contacting control, I was advised to phone Sergeant William Clark. Contacting Sergeant Clark, he explained that in responding to a call from that address, Officer Stan Anderson and he had found some strange things happening there. Several items had been broken, and he was told that objects like an iron were flying from a table into a wall on the opposite side of the room. Glasses were shattering spontaneously, etc. He said that they had tried to phone me at home earlier, and when they couldn't reach me, he called his pastor. I arrived just moments after his pastor. We had returned to the living room when Sergeant Clark asked me to step down the hall with him. He was asking about writing out a report for this run. Who would believe all this? When he stopped and said, "I feel it's here again." About that time, we heard what sounded like a cupboard door slam. I felt a chilling sensation like a mantle slipped over my shoulders and then falling down my body to the floor, and then it was gone. Talking more with the family, we tried to find if anyone was into the occult, tarot cards, Dungeons and Dragons, etc. We also tried to get more information from Tony, whom we found had tapes of heavy metal music. We then formed a circle with all the family in the living room, and Reverend Gibson led us in a prayer. We left shortly thereafter as the family felt things had calmed down and they were more comfortable. In the afternoon, Sergeant Clark phoned me at the office and said that he was going by the house in LaSalle to see how everything was. He said that some of the Catholic officers were talking and suggested that Father John Ryan of St. Anthony's Catholic Church had interest in and experience in dealing with this type of phenomenon. Father Ryan would meet us at the house at 1400 hours on Wednesday, February 28th to bless the house. Sergeant Clark had discussed this with Virginia, and she said she would like to have this done. This is a picture of Father John Ryan. It was reported that Father Ryan sprinkled holy water throughout the house while giving the standard blessing. "Peace be with this house and all who live here. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Sergeant William Clark's Interdepartment Communication on the incident, Tuesday, February 27, 1990. Upon our arrival, Angela stated 5 more events had occurred the night before. She told me they had put Tony on a plane to Puerto Rico that morning at 11 a.m. And since his departure, there had been no further events. Angela's father told me he had spoken to Tony, and Tony admitted to being involved in a group that practiced satanic rituals. These rituals involved sacrificing small animals. Angela also advised me of other behaviors Tony displayed that suggested satanic worship. On that Sunday night, we were at the residence. I tried to talk to Tony, but he was very unresponsive and agitated. Father Ryan of St. Anthony's Catholic Church was contacted by one of our street officers, and he agreed to perform what he called a special blessing and advised me that, based on what was explained to him, these were very real occurrences. On February 28, 1990 at 2 p.m., myself, Chaplain Cunningham, an elder from his church, and Father Ryan met on LaSalle Street. Upon our arrival, there were several media crews at the house. I am unclear as to how media found out about this investigation. Once inside, Father Ryan blessed the house through his normal procedures. After speaking to all the parties involved, the general consensus is that these incidents were manifested from some type of demonic or satanic association that Tony was involved with in Puerto Rico, and that had followed him to Indianapolis. Apparently, Angela's family was considering sending him back to Puerto Rico when he was threatened with return. This force manifested itself in such a way as to force his relatives to let him stay in Indianapolis. As of March 3rd, there have been no other occurrences. Chaplain Wilbur Cunningham's Interdepartment Communication on this incident. Wednesday, February 28, 1990, shortly after I arrived in my office about 0800 hours, Tina Cosby TV Channel 8 phoned. She said she had overheard some people talking and wanted to know what was going on, 2800 block of North LaSalle Street, about 2 in the afternoon. She indicated she had heard something about evil spirits in the house. They had a crew ready and wanted to go to the house right away. I asked her to give me some time to make some phone calls. I tried to call Andrew Stoner for counsel, then Sergeant William Clark to get information he might have on the media involvement. Unable to reach either of them at this time, I phoned Angela at work and appraised her of what was happening. She asked me if talking about this might help someone else. I said that it might, but I wasn't sure. I asked her if she would want to talk with Tina. She called Tina and made arrangements to talk with her. The media interviewed Angela about the incident. On the scene, WRTV 6 reporter Jack Reinhardt was reportedly upset that Wish TV 8 had already been in the house and was leaving, and he couldn't get access. The Indianapolis News quoted Patrolman Stan Anderson as saying, "He is experienced at dealing with burglars and murderers, but he doesn't know how to investigate the unknown." He said the back 2 rooms of the home had a strange warmness. Anderson mused, "How would we classify this case? It wasn't a burglary, but it was close to vandalism. Even if we could classify it, who would we consider as a suspect? A spirit?" For Sergeant William Clark, it reaffirmed his faith. After witnessing demonic activity firsthand, there is no question that the Bible is real and true, and God is very much alive. This case was officially entered into the Indianapolis Police Department files under case number 73484-1, Frank Adam. Vandalism.